Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Reuters event, this webinar. Today, we have three great panelists who are going to talk about agility, efficiency, customer centricity, and executing global scale digital transformation in the insurance industry. So I am joined by Mathieu Cayat, who is Chief Operating Officer of Axa XL, and Liz Oswald, who is Head of Technology Transformation at Zurich, and Massimo Caressinu, who is Digital Transformation Director at Swiss Re. Just a little background about the panel. We're going to talk about overhauling insurance companies' technical strategies to optimize internal processes and customer experience potential. I guess that all of us on this webinar are aware that the insurance industry is often characterized by a lot of outdated and legacy systems across multiple geographies, which aren't so flexible and could really do with upgrading to unlock the benefits of digital transformation. But there are roadblocks for doing that. It's complicated. Many of these things aren't documented properly, and there are challenges to rolling out new and modern systems. But the benefits are increased efficiency, a lot more efficient operations, and potentially new value propositions as well. So shortly, I'm going to hand over to our panelists, but I just want to highlight now we will be accepting questions from the audience. So the format is that each of my panelists is going to give an introduction about themselves and their perspective on this topic, and then we're going to go to questions from you guys out there. So please put those questions in and I'll select them and pose them to our panel. But that's enough from me, and at that point I would like to introduce Mathieu Cayat, who will tell us a little about himself and about Axa XL and perspectives on digital transformation. Mathieu.
Thanks very much, Jim, and good morning, everyone. So a few words about Axa XL first. Axa XL is the division of Axa dedicated to large, complex, and specialty risks on the insurance side, and also to reinsurance. Reinsurance being about 25% and 75% being for the insurance business. Overall, we're talking about a 20 billion euros book. The strategy for Axa XL, in a nutshell, is basically to partner with clients to bring creative and comprehensive risk management solutions. I've been in Axa XL since Axa XL was created 3.5 years ago. I took the role of Chief Operating Officer at that point when Axa acquired XL Catlin and created Axa XL. Before that, I was already on the large commercial and specialty risk in Axa Corporate Solutions. That was the Axa entity dedicated to this type of business. And I had a lot of different positions, but my background is basically what we generally call the business side, as I led or co-led lines of business entities, and at the end, Axa Corporate Solutions underwriting overall. And even before that, my background is mathematics, and that's why probably, although I was on the so-called business side, I was always very involved in the tech and data project before I completely switched with the COO role a few years back. So enough about me. I think that it's clear there are lots of opportunities for digital enhancement and further digital transformation in the large commercial lines and specialty insurance and in insurance in general. If we compare, for example, to banking, we see that there are still ways of improvement. And I would say that there are some benefits we can expect from that. It's benefits about efficiency, about customer experience, and by the way, generally, the two go together. But beyond, I would say, these benefits, I think it's also a necessity. And the reason is that our industry's costs are too high, but also our industry in some areas becomes less relevant. And typically in the specialty market, in the large commercial lines market, we see that with the increase of immaterial assets, the type of protection that is requested from our clients is more and more challenging to deliver. Covering cyber, covering non-damaged business interruption, etc., is increasingly challenging. And we have to make sure that we leverage technology and data to make sure that we are still able to offer solutions for these more stretching risks in the future. So how can tech and data help us solve all that? I think that tech brings us lots of opportunities. Cloud, APIs, blockchain, big data, etc. It's a massive opportunity to do things that we were not able to do before, to get insights we didn't have, to increase time to market, efficiency, flexibility, reliability. But as we see, it's not just about tech. It's about the way we use tech. You can be cloud-enabled and insecure. You can be API-enabled and rigid. So it's all about the way we use it rather than the technology itself. And beyond that, I would say that we have all experienced how easy it is to include elements of technology and element of digitalization across the value chain. But the real value comes when we are able to do that at scale, which means across the value chain, across the portfolio, across the whole business unit. And this requires a really proper architecture and foundation work. And this is where one of our challenges is arising, I believe, is that we already have a big technical debt, and therefore we have a short-term versus long-term challenge. Investment in tech has a longer cycle than generally investment in other areas of our business. So how can we gain confidence and support to build foundation components, to properly architecture what we want to do, to ensure that we are enabling a digital roadmap that is really going to flourish at scale? Not easy when we already have a tech landscape that everybody knows is already way too heavy. So an option, of course, is to start massive programs of replatforming, and sometimes it makes sense and it's necessary. But generally, when we touch the core systems, when we touch the core components, the return on investments are very long. And there is also the risk that in the meantime, all this focus is detrimental to delivering additional business capabilities. So an easier option and maybe more realistic is to gradually reduce technical debt as you move along. The most important being, of course, not to recreate a technical debt for the future. And again, the work of architecture is very critical in that sense. So we are at a point where we see that we need some foundation investment. We need to make sure that we architecture properly a number of things. And this, for me, has a critical component, which is to enable future flexibility, because we don't know exactly what the future needs will be. What we know is that the needs, the markets, the regulatory environment will evolve. So we have to create things which are modular, which are flexible, because that's the only certainty we have about the future, is that things are going to move all the time. And to do that, we have to make sure that we engage properly with our business stakeholders. So making sure that we have the right lead time to put in place the right foundations and make sure we do that in the right direction from business perspective really requires to have this very tight connection with business stakeholders. And also to find the right balance between delivering foundation and starting also to deliver some dedicated capabilities that can be tested, that will prove the point and increase the confidence in the transformation program we have. So the connection between business and tech data is critical, to the point that actually the distinction doesn't make much sense anymore, especially when we move into agile organization and not just agile projects. And this is a great opportunity to solve issues in our industry. But as we see, because of this very tight connection, our organizations have to be adequate, have to work appropriately to make sure that we unleash the potential of tech and data. And this requires a lot of support from the top management of the company. It requires leaders to acknowledge the need to also make the whole company evolve to be fit for purpose to enable the tech, and therefore a sufficient understanding of the top management about what is tech, what it enables, and how we can make it work. So the digital transformation really requires strong sponsorship, widespread understanding, specific ways of working. Just a few words about one example from Axa XL on our data roadmap. We started a massive data transformation end of 2016. At the time, we had a very scattered data landscape with no common definition, no specific dedicated tech, lots of different data sources, not a single version of truth. I'm sure it sounds very familiar to lots of people. And that was, of course, not the right support to make the right business decision. There were lots of costs involved when we had to bring the platform to be compliant, to be secure, etc. So not really a great position to be in. The program that was started focused a lot on foundations, and there was a huge foundational work done to resolve that situation and move into a global platform. And of course, these are investment in tens and tens of millions. And when I took over data 18 months ago, wasn't in my scope before, I realized that we really needed to focus on the use cases, because maybe the balance had been too much on the foundations. not enough on engaging with our business partners. And it's really important when we do that we accept the feedback through NPS, for example, that we make sure that we are very listening to the needs and that we don't focus only on foundations. And by doing that, I would say that we reshuffled the balance, we created the right traction, and we are now on a roadmap where we have started to very strongly decommission a number of old applications, which is the ultimate test. Nothing is achieved as long as you have not decommissioned, and then you got the adoption to the new product. It is now, I would say, accepted and fully supported in Axa XL that our data strategy, our data tools makes full sense and really help us to move the needle towards a much more data analytics-led company. There is still a lot of use cases to be delivered, but I would say that before that, we've been in a position where it was not commonly accepted, and this really slowed down adoption just because we did not engage the business soon enough. So as a conclusion, I would say that the critical point about tech and data and digital transformation is making this blend of people through agile organizations to make sure that we have the right balance between clear foundational architecture targets and use cases and adoption that can be monitored on a monthly basis to always adapt to the actual needs and make sure that we get continued support. At the end of the day, I think it's a very exciting journey because it's not just about tech, it's about really connecting people and getting them to work together differently. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Mathieu. That was very interesting. I liked your emphasis on future flexibility and the merging of technology and business and particularly data. I think we'll come back to that in the later discussion, because as you take data out of silo systems, it can become meaningless. You need to associate ontologies and context and metadata with it to actually use it. It's quite an interesting thing. We'll come back to that. Once again, anyone out there listening, please do submit the questions. We'll come back to those when all three panelists have given their introductory remarks. But at this point, I would like to ask Liz Oswald to provide her perspective, some introduction and her perspective on digital transformation in insurance. Liz.
Great. Thanks, Jim. And thank you to everyone for joining today. And thanks for for Reuters for having us. So I think that what we can already see when I think about my remarks and what Mathieu has just shared with us is digital transformation can mean many things to our different organizations, and it can encompass a lot of different elements. So I think Mathieu focused in his example on data, and I'd like to focus on digital experience in mine, right? Because we probably all have these multi-factor digital transformation strategies, and I think it's really interesting that we'll touch upon different elements of that today. So Zurich is turning 150 years old this year, and as we look towards the next 150 years, we have the ambition to become the #1 global insurer. And we know in order to do that, in today's business and consumer environment, we need to provide an excellent digital experience to our customers, our agents, and our brokers. It's a must-have. And when we started to look internally, though, we saw there were actually significant opportunities to improve the digital experience that we were giving to our own employees, those that need to deliver that vision to our external stakeholders. And so we started to look at how could we, for both internally and externally, deliver those tools and user flows that engage, that delight, and that bring value added beyond just the technology itself to our users and to Zurich. And so we identified that gap, and then we developed the solution, which is the One Zurich application for employees. And so today, that's what I'll focus on as a case study. Hopefully, by the time I go through this, you'll understand better one example of something we're doing in digital transformation, but also maybe identify some tips or approaches that may be helpful in your own organization's journey. So just to quickly recap on the gap and then the solution, what we found when we looked internally at our employee experience was, and again, this probably sounds familiar as Mathieu said about your data landscape, for our employee platforms, we had many of them. They weren't connected. We had HR, we had IT support, we had space booking, we had news and communications, and it was frequently a feedback on our ENPS that it felt scattered to people and they weren't sure where to look for things. And so furthermore, a lot of these interfaces were a bit outdated and they weren't mobile enabled, which is just becoming ground stakes these days. And so taking all of those factors into account, we developed the One Zurich app for employees. It is a single one-stop shop for employees that doesn't just reproduce the desktop versions, if you will, that we've had of those technologies, but really considers the modern user interface and flows. It's available in all of our languages globally, worldwide, and on iOS and Android, whether in the public app store or in our internal work app stores. So it's widely available to our employees. And what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the how we got there. And we're still at the beginning of this, right? We are rolling out globally to 40+ business units this year. We're live in, I think, just shy of 20 now, but we have many more to roll out to. And I think in terms of talking about the how, I was really excited when I saw the topic of the panel that focused on agility, efficiency, and customer centricity, because I said, wow, those are actually the tenets by which we're bringing forth this app into Zurich. So I'll kind of use those as guideposts as I talk through it. So from the agility perspective, this is probably true in your organizations as well. We had in tech and ops really been focused in the past on a project or program perspective, which would be identifying a scope of some change that we wanted to make, associating a budget and a timeline with that. When we got through that project, maybe then there was kind of a BAU, business as usual enhancements or small changes. But what we realized is as we went into delivering for our users and offering that digital experience, that's something that needs to be much more flexible and adaptable. And to do that, we needed to go from that project mindset into much more of a product mindset, where we had that continuous backlog that we're prioritizing based on the shifting needs of our end users. So that isn't something that we can snap overnight, to be honest, organizationally. We're taking many approaches to that, both with sort of the cultural and mindset and hearts and minds change, some training, but also, as I think Matteo alluded to, the organizational changes that need to be in place to support that shift. And so that's something that we've been undertaking. Furthermore, as you can imagine with an app that's an all-in-one, we have a lot of integrations. And in Zurich, there are lots of different organizations that we need to work with to achieve those organizations. So having that prioritized and aligned backlog across all of the different functions is really important for us, because that is the only way we can commit to our end users to delivering things according to our roadmap. So that's been something that's important to keep transparency across all those different elements of the organization. Another piece that is specific for One Zurich, I would say it's not always economically feasible or the right fit for every initiative, but for the One Zurich product, it was really important for us to have some of those key roles in the product development and broader ecosystem of players in-house. And again, doesn't always make sense, but for us, for the agility aspect of things, to be able to really shift on a dime and reprioritize things without having to raise a new agreement or a change request or go through contracting has really allowed us to be quite flexible in how we deliver this digital experience. So those are just a couple of key things from agility. On the efficiency front, One Zurich brings efficiency to our organization in many ways. From an end user perspective of the app, it's all in one, so they don't need to go to all those different platforms. Furthermore, we've tried to take out all the sign-in, right? So we have a very strong security position at Zurich, as well as I'm sure many insurance companies do, and Matteo alluded to. But that meant that those systems all had different access control and security policies. And so we needed to find a way to operate within those and not have the user having to log in every time they went into different features. And so that's something that we actually had to develop new technology and code to achieve in our organization, but we think it's worth it for the end user experience, for that efficiency trade-off. Another element of efficiency is from the business unit perspective, right? So our employees are all aligned to business units, either regionally or at the country level. And these business units previously had many platforms that they were trying to reach their employees. And now we're offering them that single interface and ways that they can communicate and interact directly with their employees through one channel. So that's another efficiency gain. And finally, from more the tech side of things, we're using repeatable integration patterns. So we're not reinventing the wheel every time we need to integrate something new into our middleware. And we're also using something called feature flagging that really addresses that global scale. So we're a global app, but we need to be relevant locally. And that means sometimes some features are only relevant for a set of business units and not others. And through feature flagging, technology, we're actually able to just click a button and turn something on or off for a specific business unit without having to do a new release of the application. So this is quite efficient from the development and release perspective. So those are just a couple of pieces on efficiency, and I'll just close briefly with the customer centricity element, because of course this is the heart and soul of a user-focused application. And for us, this has really been achieved through extensive customer experience research that we do with both the end users and then the business units themselves, because we operate in a B2B2C model here. So it's actually the business units who are buying the app on behalf of their employees. And so we need to take into account their priorities and considerations as well, because they also have that strategic view of what's coming to their business units. And so we do this through focus groups, interviews, polls. We don't just look at the data up front of what people want, but we do also, of course, monitor usage of the app to see which features are most used. You require priority enhancement aren't being used. Perhaps we need to change those. So that's something that we look at very carefully with our analytics. We also have diverse feedback channels available in the app itself and through the more traditional communication channels of Workplace and SharePoint in our organization. And we do offer a flexible product model to the business unit. So we have that global core that's standard across the globe, but then we offer local customizations, again, and integrations so that the business units can make it most relevant to their people and decide what makes sense economically for them from that perspective as well. So just to quickly wrap up, we've gone through kind of the problem and the solution, but also then talked about the how in terms of agility, efficiency, and customer centricity. I think this is just one case study of what we're doing in Zurich towards digital transformation, achieving that excellence in the digital experience. And I look forward to expanding upon that and speaking in the Q&A as well, answering questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Liz. Yes, it's very interesting to hear you focusing on experience and customer centricity being the heart and soul of the business. It's definitely true, but oftentimes these digital transformation initiatives focus on making things simply more efficient without changing the proposition. And changing the proposition, it needs a different approach, but when you get it right, you also drive efficiency, as Mathieu mentioned earlier. So it's great to hear you doing that. Again, a reminder to send in questions, please, through the Q&A panel preferred, but the chat does work. And I have some questions through already, but at this point, I would like to introduce Massimo to provide his perspective on digital transformation in insurance.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to Reuters Events for having invited me as a speaker to this webinar. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for your attendance. I'm Digital Transformation Director in Swiss Re, and in my tenure in Swiss Re, I held different senior roles, including CEO for a Swiss Re subsidiary for group life and health insurance in Italy. To complete a brief introduction about myself, before joining Swiss Re, I worked for McKinsey, where I led numerous business technology and operations engagement for financial institutions. I'm industrial engineer by education. I am Italian, hence my accent, and Swiss. And now in Swiss Re, I have a privilege of leading a global digital transformation program in the contracts area. Contracts are the core reinsurance and insurance products. They contain de facto our promise to pay to the client. And for the past 20 years, we have observed how major external events, ultimately, for example, the COVID, led to losses, and therefore I have tested the full industry on terms and conditions. Therefore, the key objective is to have clear and ambiguous terms and conditions, which should be written in each and every contract. The digital transformation program aims to provide, therefore, transparency and insights on all of the insurance and reinsurance contracts that Swiss Re has, and therefore enable Swiss Re to retrieve, to analyze, and to negotiate new and enforced contracts throughout the value chain. In this, technology is a key enabler. And we are implementing a blend of data science, so artificial intelligence, AI, coupled with internal business rules to guide our underwriters and contract experts to strengthen the quality of our contracts when we have a PAN, and properly negotiate clauses when we don't have a PAN because we are a follower in, for example, in an insurance panel. And all of this must be integrated end to end with the other business unit systems, for example, workflow or costing tools, in order to give the best user experience as possible. Now, being contracts at the core of what we do, there are several complexities that we are trying to overcome. And I would mention, just for brevity, the three of them. First of all is the bespoke nature of reinsurance and commercial contracts. Swiss Re is insurance complex risk with terms and conditions that must reflect the client needs. At the same time, they must adhere to group risk appetite as per our underwriting standards. And therefore, contract wording must be in line with the underwriting intention. And ultimately, they need to cope with the costing models. Therefore, re and slash insurers cannot simply use our own contract templates because typically are also brokers that are drafting the contract for a panel. So complexity on the bespoke. Second complexity is that the technology is not yet mature or developed enough for handling this bespoke nature. Reinsurance and insurance language is not plain common English, and the industry is still lagging of standard terms and condition libraries. However, that will eventually happen, because if it is not an if question whether the technology will be an important decision support system, it is more a question of when and how. And the complexity lies in solving the trade-off between the technology investments and the financial returns. Last but not least, reinsurance, as well as commercial insurance, is a people business. So it means that dealing with future events, which are never deterministic, require quite a level of expertise and subjectivity in underwriting the risks, and therefore the strong people nature of this business. The way in which we cope with this complexity is that since the beginning, we had strong buy-in and commitment from the top management, and therefore a delegation of a group executive committee is our program steering body. And this one is extremely important and a key prerequisite for success. Second, we have mobilized the right people in terms of mix, diversity, in terms of business and technology experience, in terms of delivery capability. It is important to have also the right experience in terms of people that they did it, been there, done that. And the key involvement of business units subject matter experts, which is vital for defining what should be the business user experience and as well as for preparing the change management. In terms of solution, we scouted the market for a buy solution, but there is not silver bullet for it. So we decided to have a blend of make and selected buy to ensure that the overall product is then tailored yet scalable for the offering, and therefore potentially even to be offered as a solution to clients. In selecting technology partners, we are extremely methodical, and first we always have proof of concepts in order to test viability. And when we work with them, we work with them as an overall team. So no distinction between internal and external. In terms of mindset, we try to be as resilient and as pragmatic as possible. We are committed and focused to the overall goal, but yet we know that there is more than one path to arrive to the target, and therefore we are flexible to adapt the journey. And finally, since the beginning, we have integrated change management as a core enabler of a delivery element of a program. Now, this type of global scale digital transformation program are by definition full of potential traps. These are the typical program risks. It is like a bit walking in a minefield. And here are a couple of risks that we try to avoid or and we mitigate. First risk is the risk of silos between teams. And what we do is we avoid instead the us versus them approach, typical tech versus business, global versus local, and push on the same direction. We try to understand the point of view and then strike balances when needed. Another risk that we avoid is having moving targets. We set our North Star, so an ideal end state that we would like to arrive. But yes, and we define the product as a common product, so as a minimum common denominator among the different business units that we have, as well as the different line of business. This is important to properly strike the balance. Another risk that we mitigate is to have unrealistic tech prioritization. We try to be yet ambitious, and we set high expectations. At the same time, we are honest in the estimation, and we avoid sandbagging. And finally, a risk with this program, with many teams working, is that they are uncoordinated in their process, in their methodology for delivery. And we follow instead the same agile methodology across for the full program in order to deliver and to enable delivery at scale. So happy to further elaborate in the Q&A. To you, Jim.
Thank you very much on that, Massimo. Yes, it's a particularly complex area you've been focusing on there. I think contracts for commercial and reinsurance are one of the more complex areas. Filing cabinets full of documents up to 20 years old and cross-reference with specific vocabulary has to be something of a challenge. So thank you to the panelists for the introductions. We have got some questions coming in, and I'm going to just choose the first from those, and this came in reasonably early. It is in fact addressed to Mathieu, but I think everyone will have a perspective on it. And the question was, so senior management should be on board with digital transformation. Which senior managers are best placed to oversee this and be accountable? And they say, should it be a chief operations officer? So I'll pose that to you, Mathieu, first as a COO, but please do try and be objective. And I'll ask others for their comments too.
Thanks very much for the question. And I think that what is really important is that these transformations are never viewed as a tech thing or as a COO thing, because they're not. And even if the drive often comes from the COO or a chief transformation officer, it is really important that the entire leadership team is actually embarked. And it's really important for everyone to understand that it's not, I give a bit of investment or a lot of investment to a tech guy and he's going to solve my problems. It's not what's going to happen, or it's not going to be a satisfactory solution. So to try to be concrete on that, for me, it's normal that there is a drive from, I would say, with a tech angle, because we see this is where the critical changes are happening first. But for me, this journey cannot happen if it's not a CEO topic and a leadership team or executive committee topic all along.
Okay. Liz, Massimo?
Yeah, it is absolutely important. And the importance is to identify who has the pen, who can decide. And therefore, if a decision is really on budget, that are moving and they are at the level of a group executive committee, then a subset of executive committee must be in the steering. At the same time, needs to involve in the decision process all the senior managers that actually take a decision, even level down. And as much as possible, this decision has to be brought to let's say, to the ground floor, really to be as granular as possible. But there is not a ready cooked solution. At the end, is my suggestion is always to find and to involve the person that has the power to decide, the person that owns the decision in that respective subject, and make sure that the different layers of the organization are in line. There is not gap in between layers.
I'll just add, I agree with both what Matteo and Massimo said. I think also to Matteo's point about it can't just be tech, right? So tech often comes with a vision because we're aware of what's in the market or how fast things are moving. But and I don't like saying tech and business actually separate, right? But what's been traditionally separated that way, the business is closest to the people who need to use that technology. And again, the technology is really nothing if it's not useful to the people, or if the data is just data and it's not insights for the people that then need to use that to make decisions. So I think it truly has to be the marrying of those two sides and have that executive sponsorship and the understanding of the why we're doing it and the value on both sides, right? It can't just be, we're going to implement this new technology, roll it out. Look, you get this. And people go, but I can't use that, right? So I do think, first of all, you know, before even the sponsorship, there's that shared communal interest in doing this and understanding the benefit to everyone. And then with the senior sponsorship is the way to execute it. But I think Massimo also alluded to, change doesn't just come from above. It's very important to have that executive sponsorship, but there does need to be that bottom-up understanding and buy-in and support for those people that need to change the way they work, change the way they think. And so, you know, at Zurich, for example, we're doing that through digital transformation academies. You know, formal learning is just one piece of the puzzle, though. So how do you get people, ready to action? So one thing is training, but we also are looking at our organizational design and the roles that we have, and how can we build people up into the new roles that we need. And part of that is through secondments, for example. So real on the job learning of how to do this. So maybe Massimo, you have people that were in traditional contracts, right? And they want to work in the new way. They want to see how it works. How do we get them that experience so they can make that change at the ground level, you know, without, because we all know sitting in a classroom or now online and clicking through slides won't be the way. So it's how do we combine that understanding of the vision of where we want to go, give people the tools and resources they need to get there, and then also give them experience. And that also, as you might imagine, is resource intense. So that requires executive sponsorship as well to achieve that.
Thank you for that. I'd like to take a slightly different perspective on a theme that's been mentioned several times in terms of the alignment of technology and business. What about the separation of technology and business? So if you look at an e-commerce provider, many of them don't run the e-commerce platform that's supporting their business. If you look at a mobile telecoms operator, a cellular operator, many of them don't operate the networks. That's outsourced to a partner like an Ericsson. What potential is there to adopt that kind of a model, potentially with a systems integrator or another partner, in a way that enables the CTO within the insurance company to become more of a CDO who's directing technology strategy and leaving delivery to someone else? Is there potential for that? Anybody who has a view on that? Matteo, you must have a view.
Yeah, no, I do. Thank you, Jim, and that's a fair point. There are some, I would say, more commoditized deliveries that can be distinguished, I would say. And to manage this, it can be done indeed probably with more flexibility, with a partner, with dedicated team, etc., etc. So I think it makes sense. There is just one caveat. In the past, there was a very clear distinction between all the infrastructure capabilities and all the apps. And basically, it was all about saying, let's make sure that the apps are really fitting the business needs and that we create that connection. And we see that infrastructure topics can become a bottleneck if there is not a connection all along from the apps, from the business to the apps to the infrastructure, to put it simply. And we have to be careful that typically in a cloud operating environment, there is a fantastic opportunity to be faster in our releases, but it really requires to have the full alignment down to infrastructure. A lot of it can be automated. A lot of it can be done in standard procedures, etc. What I mean is that it's not like it's completely commoditized and we don't really care what's going on there, because otherwise it can become a bottleneck.
Jim, if you like, I can add also my perspective on that, which is in line with what is future-proof technology. My common sense is that when technology really supports core business processes and core business competence, I would prefer to have a bit of a white box technology solution. So the company must understand and be able to evolve its business logic inside the tool. And for me, this one is a link to the concept of best owner. And best owner means also for me to have the human in the loop, which is an essential part to improve the technology over time. And this one is one aspect. For instead non-core ancillary business processes and competence, I would follow instead the market standards and go with the flow. And there, instead, it resonates with me what you said about separating a bit two things, because I don't have to challenge the technology. I don't have to reinvent the wheel if it is not really the core of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I would just add, Massimo, to that. I think echoed this earlier, but that key roles in-house, and I think that's similar to the white box that you mentioned. So, you know, for the flexibility that we need for something that's changing frequently, it's important for us to have at least the key roles. It doesn't mean we don't partner. It doesn't mean we don't bring in, you know, heavily vetted, I think, as you said, Massimo, right, strategic partners that make sense for what we're trying to do. There's, of course, the commodity angle, but I think there's also the angle of the technology that we choose itself, and coming again to that future proofing. For example, as we probably all know, again, table stakes now with cloud, right? And the ability to establish a componentized or microservices model in cloud means that we can build the parts of it that we need the white box for, to use Massimo's language, and bring in those other commodity components to build that ecosystem of things. And this is something that we're doing right now, right? So we're looking at, you know, we've gotten to a certain point with an element of the 1-0 cap, just to use that as an example, but we know that the market is further on some of those pieces. We're now looking at, do we go with that and leverage that market roadmap where they're moving faster than we will, or how much control do we still keep? And do we do that via API integration, SDK, to give us the flexibility we still want over that technology so that it's not completely out of our hands? And so it is, but it's something that's almost on a case-by-case basis for the specific use case that we're trying to do, and seeing what's in the market, and then what we feel like we really need to own in-house to be able to deliver at pace.
Thank you. I mean, thank you all for those thoughts. There is a related question which has come through, which is, I mean, so the question is from an anonymous attendee. Are we able to deliver a full digital transformation without a business underwriting simplification? For instance, defining a product catalog with simple insurance products. And I guess there's a tension there. The simpler it is, the easier it is to re-engineer it and standardize it. But then there's a competitive dynamic, because your competitor who can do it more flexibly might win business that you might not. So how do you manage that dynamic?
Yeah, I can speak to this, Massimo. I think it is that the interim or the short term, and then the longer term view, and giving yourself that flexibility. To be honest, if you look at 1-0, right, it's sitting above many different systems, and wouldn't it ultimately be more efficient to reduce the underlying systems instead of having to connect them all together? That won't always make sense, right? So in the interim, to be at speed, at pace, right? We create that flexible middleware layer that allows us to do all of these integrations, so we can go ahead and to deliver to the end user expectations, while we look at a longer term roadmap of what does it make sense to simplify underneath that. So I don't think it has to be a sequenced thing. I think it can be in parallel, so that you can move, as you said, Jim, at pace, to not lose the customer or the business or that strategic advantage, while still considering that you don't want to just keep band-aiding systems that maybe should, or processes or taxonomies, as they said, you know, that need a look as well, right? So it's how do you kind of do both to keep that pace, but then not, as I think Mathieu said earlier, just collect debt of any kind, whether it's technical or in process. I think it's important to do both.
Yep, a good point, Liz. And I can complement. I think that in principle it's always good if there is a further simplification or further modularization of insurance products as well as process and underwriting. However, it is a moving target. I mean, there are things that will become simpler and therefore replicable and therefore easier. At the same time, the frontier will expand always versus more tailored things, structured transactions, for example. And therefore, we cannot avoid the reality of this moving target first. And then second, we cannot oversimplify the reality. Some businesses are complex and long tail. For example, treaty in reinsurance, life and health, their time span is 15, 20, 25 years. And you cannot go back and then have a product catalog and then erase what you have. You need to work with the reality, and therefore you need to sometimes to embrace that some aspects are really bespoke. You need to enable this flexibility.
If I may, I think it's a very important topic, and I like the way Liz described it about the short term and long term. In Axa XL, we can write both a multinational operating in 32 countries with a captive and tens of millions of premium and a $2,000 drawn liability policy. We can't do that with the same setup, with the same flexibility, with the same customization. And unfortunately, sometimes we do. And I say we, it's not Axa XL, it's the market. So I think that it's really important indeed that we try to segment more what requires tailor-made, handwritten coverage and what doesn't. And this will be moving. This will be moving because the needs are changing and also because our ability to technologically manage things is increasing. For example, what is the level of complexity we can manage and tailorization through computable contracts? It's growing. It's growing with our expertise, with the knowledge we can bring in the market, etc. And this brings a lot of value. I'm not just saying about insurers saving costs with computable contracts. I'm talking about ensuring more contract certainty that Massimo referred to earlier, which is really important. I'm talking about smoothing and accelerating the service, both for adjustments in policy, claim settlement, etc. So there is a real value for everyone if we make the effort of doing it. And I think that we are still, let's be clear, in an area, at least in the large commercial lines and specialty, where part of this semi-standardization, modularization doesn't happen because it doesn't make sense, because it has to be fully tailor-made. And part of it doesn't happen because there is a resistance that is just, I guess, a fear of potentially automating too much, replacing underwriters. It remains a people business. I think it will remain a people business. I don't believe that the type of market Axa XL or Centricity is in, we're going to replace underwriters by technology, at least not in the foreseeable future, but we are going to go more and more into augmented underwriting, augmented claims handling, where there is a blend, and we make sure that the underwriters can concentrate on what brings the most value. So long story short, I really do believe that an effort of simplification would bring a lot of benefits to everyone, and we should push in that direction, leveraging the technology that we now have to do that.
Thank you for that. Thanks to everybody for your contributions on that. There's a related question which has come in, which is quite similar or a slightly different perspective on this topic of sequential and rolling digital transformation, which is around the current climate. How have the parameters changed around how you spend budget on technology to drive efficiency? So I guess there's a lot of, I guess there are many constraints coming, and there are probably some top-down constraints about available budgets and timing and results being needed in certain times. How does that change an overall digital transformation program? So anyway, Mathieu, you want to?
Yeah, so it's, well, I guess that all of us have a lot of discussions about that with our boss, our leadership teams. Yeah, first, we have to acknowledge that because of some of the drivers like security, it becomes more and more costly to do a number of things. There is service variation when we put more tech in. There is contract inflation that has been there for years and is going probably to increase. There is this increased cost of managing the technical debt in an environment of increased cyber threat, etc. So I would say that for most of us, unfortunately, just keeping the lights on is more and more expensive. And there is always a risk that we look at this as an overall budget and basically say, okay, if you need more money to, let's say, secure a server, then we have less money to deliver a tech capability for underwriting. And this should be completely different conversations. But there is a risk when you look at a tech budget to mix these topics, which should not be mixed, I don't think. So at the end of the day, I think that what is really important when we look at the tech budgets is to see overall what it brings to the company, what it brings in savings, not just in tech and not just a rationalization of tech bringing savings in tech, but how savings in the tech landscape or new features in the tech landscape can really drive savings across the company and therefore fuel the investment. And also try to value the capabilities. What is the value of a new tech capability for a client in claims management, etc.? It's not always easy. I think it's important to put it on the table. And then there is a level of conviction. It's not always possible to demonstrate with a completely solid business case every single investment in terms of return. And I think that this is where the leadership has to also exert this level of leadership to say, we haven't got to proof of every single detail, but we strongly believe, and therefore we will do it.
Yes.
I agree. I think we can't afford to not invest, right? In digital transformation. That's a basic, but it's which things do we invest in and which do we prioritize? And as Matthias said, it's how do you define that value? Because there's a savings element, but then of course there's a retention element, there's a value stream, a new revenue stream element. So combining those and then balancing them is not always easy when we look at black and white KPIs. But I think there is still, especially given how our organizations have probably traditionally done funding cycles, there is a bit of a leap of faith, right? Because it's a lot easier, I think, to fund a black and white savings case in some times versus we know this is not going to be immediate, right? But we can look at the ROI over the next few years, and through these intangibles that will be the leading metrics, we know we're going to get to those outcome metrics in the future, right? So I think it does require that storytelling, right? And it's based on something that we believe is quantifiable, but how can you quantify that? Can you benchmark it? Can you look at the people impact, things that maybe we haven't considered fully in the traditional business case, and see how to bring that to the leaders that might be traditionally looking at, you know, minuses and pluses in a spreadsheet.
Okay, Massimo, if you have any thoughts, feel free.
No, I think that it was said quite a lot already.
Thank you. So we're down to less than 10 minutes now. So we've had a few questions in around new technologies. We've touched on AI and machine learning during the discussion so far, but we've also had questions around digital ledgers, which I think is probably distributed ledgers, digital contracts, and digital money. And the role of these things in digital transformation, and also the role of AI in digital transformation. I guess the answer for AI is easier than the distributed ledger and digital contracts. But Massimo, perhaps you could provide some thoughts on the role of these new technologies in enabling transformation overall.
Yes, and I see that in the Q&A panel, there is a question about whether experienced people make better decisions than AI, machine learning. And so this one, I would like to link it also to the reply to this question.
Yeah.
My view is undoubtedly that an experienced underwriter beats on the single contract AI. And on the single contract, in that there is no dispute. But what AI can do and what typically the technology can do is process hundreds, if not thousands, of contracts in parallel and therefore be an efficient and effective support system for the expert. Therefore, it's the concept of having the human in the loop, but also making sure that it's more a support and not instead something that will substitute experience. Yeah. Experience cannot be substituted. Therefore, among the digital trends or somehow the most impactful technology, I would definitely see that AI is mainstream or becoming mainstream. But because it's unavoidable that we should embed and we should leverage this technology as a supporting tool. And so it's not a question of if, it's more a question of when and how. Yes. So that will be also my advice. Test it, make sure that the people are not fearing actually somehow a threat from AI, but actually a support from it.
So you leverage the best of the technology and of the people, and you use the technology to highlight the exceptions that the people might need to pay attention to, and look after the stuff which is entirely routine and normal and nothing exceptional.
Particularly because a person typically focuses on one thing at one time. AI instead can parallelize a lot of analysis and working in batch work 24 hours. So therefore, it's like helping on the more trivial and more automatable part, and we should not fear it, rather embrace it, but with a grain of salt.
Okay. Thank you. Liz, Mathieu, if you have something to contribute, please do. If not, I would ask for closing thoughts from everybody, but if you have some specifics to comment, please do.
Yeah, no, I would say that I very much agree with what Massimo said. And I remember when I launched Space Line of Business many years ago, I had to say, guys, in the short term, a poor underwriter with luck is going to outperform a good underwriter who's been unlucky. And unfortunately, in our markets, large commercial and specialty, it's not even easy to say who is a better underwriter, or it takes years and years. So, and I don't think we have given AI a fair shot, because I don't think that we have organized ourselves in having the right set of data to see all the power of AI. But long story short, I believe that at the end of the day, I see AI as more as a support to the underwriting decisions. And I see it growing more and more important in this underwriting decision that will still be done by an underwriter.
Okay, fine. So at that point, we're down to 3 minutes. So if you have any, just 30 seconds to 1 minute of closing thoughts about key takeaways, I think, for our audience as they head back to they're probably still at their desks, but as they head back to their day roles and pursue digital transformation. Liz, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll kick us off. So I think digital transformation covers many elements. I think I've really enjoyed the conversation today because I think we've covered quite a few of those. So depending on where you are in your organization's journey, hopefully some of this resonated with you. I would say that we've already discussed it's not just a technology implementation or shift, it really is a mindset in your organization and how your organization can support people in going through this change. I would say also we talked a little bit about just getting started, getting started with something, not fixing everything first, because if you wait, you won't get there, right? And you won't get there at pace. So I think it is also becoming a learning organization that supports that, to get started somewhere, take the learnings of that for your specific organization or the functions that you're working in, and share those learnings. Share that with the organization, because that'll give others in your group the confidence to make these changes and see what benefits can come to them.
Yeah, fully agree with that. I think it's about raising at every level of the organization the awareness and the understanding of these topics. And I would say for those who are not really fond of tech, maybe it's important to convey the message that at the end of the day, it's not about tech, it's about the way we work together. And this can be hopefully a driver to embark everyone, even with the people who are not maybe that keen and that comfortable with it.
I would complete this last concluding thoughts with some, let's say, something complementary. I think that running this sort of transformation programs requires good problem-solving skills as well as good common sense. Also needs a bit of being paranoid. Otherwise, you cannot actually anticipate roadblocks and work around them. But even more importantly, running this type of programs requires a special mindset, which is not too different from being a CEO or an entrepreneur. You need to be optimist and resilient. Otherwise, nothing will be achieved. So that is my final thought.
Okay, and at that point, I think we're broadly out of time. So thank you to my panelists, Mathieu, Liz, Massimo. It was a very interesting discussion. I found it very interesting. I learned a fair amount during that discussion. So this is a webinar which is really an early part of a conference, which is Future of Insurance Europe 2022, which will be held by Reuters in October in Amsterdam. So please do join Reuters, and I'm sure several of us at that conference. You'll be getting details of that on your email if you've joined this webinar, which clearly you have. So you'll be getting details through on that. And at that point, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists, and also thank you to everyone out there who has joined and listened and sent through questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks to the audience. Thanks a lot for the questions.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all. Goodbye.